In the dusty town of Cedar Falls, Texas, there was one job posting that stayed pinned to the general store bulletin board for months. Housekeeper and cook needed at Blackbriar Ranch. Good pay. No questions asked. The paper grew yellow with age because nobody in 3 counties would dare answer that call. Wade Langston's ranch was beautiful. From a distance, sprawling acres of green pasture stretching toward purple mountains, fine horses grazing in morning mist. But up close, it felt like a graveyard. The owner hadn't smiled in years, hadn't spoken a kind word since his wife died birthing their son, and that boy had been taken by fever before his 3rd birthday. Then came Ruthie Bell Carter, a woman with calloused hands and nothing left to lose. She'd been run out of 2 towns for reasons folks whispered about but never said plain. When she knocked on Wade's door that September morning, she didn't flinch at his scowl or step back from his silence. What happens when 2 broken souls find healing in the most unlikely place? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Falls, Texas, as Ruthie Bell Carter stepped down from the traveling merchant's wagon. Her worn leather satchel contained everything she owned: 2 dresses, a photograph of her parents, and the last $3 to her name. The September air carried the scent of cattle and mesquite, familiar smells that reminded her of the childhood farm she'd lost so many years ago. Cedar Falls wasn't much to look at. A row of weathered storefronts lined the main street, their paint peeling under the relentless Texas sun. The general store, the saloon, the blacksmith shop, and the Churchill, the essential pieces of a frontier town that had seen better days. But it was the kind of place where a woman with a tarnished reputation might find a fresh start, if she was willing to work for it. Ruthie touched the small cameo brooch pinned to her collar, her mother's last gift before consumption took her. The delicate piece of jewelry seemed out of place against her rough cotton dress, but it reminded her of who she'd been before scandal and poverty had worn her down. She'd been a lady once, raised in a proper household with piano lessons and embroidery samplers. That girl felt like a stranger now. "You sure about this, miss?" the merchant asked, eyeing her with concern. "Blackbriar Ranch ain't no place for a woman alone. That Wade Langston, he's got a reputation." Ruthie squared her shoulders. "I've heard the stories, but I need the work, and he needs a housekeeper. Seems like a fair trade." The merchant shook his head but didn't argue further. He'd seen enough desperate people to know when someone had run out of choices. As his wagon rolled away, Ruthie stood alone in the street, watching the dust settle around her feet. The general store's bulletin board drew her like a magnet. There it was, just as she'd heard described the yellowed job posting that had been hanging there for months. The paper was faded and fly-specked, but the words were still clear. Housekeeper and cook needed at Blackbriar Ranch. Good pay, no questions asked. Inquire with Wade Langston. You thinking about that job? Ruthie turned to find an elderly woman watching her with curious eyes. The woman was small and neat, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and kind eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, extending her hand. "I run the seamstress shop, and you'd be the woman who asked about the Langston job when the merchant wagon came through Millerville last week." Ruthie shook the offered hand, surprised by the firm grip. "Word travels fast in these parts." "Faster than wildfire," Sarah confirmed. "Folks are saying you're either very brave or very foolish. Haven't decided which yet myself." "Maybe both," Ruthie said with a wry smile. "I'm Ruthie Bell Carter, and I'm here to take that job if Mr. Langston will have me." Sarah's expression grew serious. "Child, you know what happened out there, don't you? Wade Langston used to be a good man before the war, before he lost his family. But grief can twist a soul something fierce. He's not the same man who left for the war 10 years ago." "I know about his wife and son," Ruthie said quietly, "and I know he's got a reputation for being hard on his help, but I've worked for difficult men before. This isn't about difficult, honey. This is about a man who's given up on living. That ranch is beautiful, but it's like a tomb now. He rattles around in that big house like a ghost, barely speaking to anyone, barely eating. Old Pete Hayes, the only ranch hand who stayed, he says. Wade talks more to his horses than to people. Ruthie felt a pang of sympathy for the man she'd never met. She knew what it was like to carry grief, to feel like the world had turned its back on you. Maybe that's exactly why he needs someone who won't give up on him. Sarah studied her for a long moment. You've got your own story, don't you? The kind that makes a woman take a job nobody else wants. Don't we all? Ruthie replied, not unkindly. But I'm not here to share sob stories. I'm here to work. Well, if you're determined to do this fool thing, you'll need supplies. Come on into my shop. I've got some things that might help. Sarah's shop was a cozy sanctuary filled with bolts of fabric, spools of thread, and the comfortable disorder of creative work. She bustled around, gathering items and stuffing them into a carpet bag. Clean aprons, she said, folding them carefully. A woman needs to look respectable, even doing hard work. And here, she pulled out a small sewing kit. You'll need to do mending. Big house like that, things fall apart without a woman's touch. I can't pay you for all this, Ruthie protested. Who said anything about paying? Consider it an investment. If you manage to last out there, I'll have someone to talk to when you come to town. Gets lonely, running a business by yourself. Ruthie felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. It had been so long since someone had shown her simple human decency. Thank you, she said softly. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if you're still there come Christmas. Sarah handed her the carpet bag and a wrapped bundle. That's fresh bread and some preserves. Man's got to eat, even if he's forgotten how to live. The walk to Blackbriar Ranch took the better part of an hour. Ruthie followed the dusty road that wound through rolling hills covered in prairie grass and scattered oak trees. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, painted in shades of gold and amber under the afternoon sun. She could see why someone might choose to build a life here, away from the complications of town living. As she crested a hill, the ranch spread out before her like something from a dream. The main house was a sprawling structure of native stone and dark wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the landscape, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. It was everything she'd imagined a successful ranch should be except for the silence. No children played in the yard, no women hung laundry on the line, no sounds of laughter or conversation drifted from the house. It was beautiful and prosperous and utterly lifeless. An old man emerged from the barn as she approached, leading a horse. He was weathered and bow-legged, with kind eyes and a cautious manner. This had to be old Pete, the only ranch hand who'd stayed. You'd be the woman from town, he said, not unkindly. Come about the job. I am. Is Mr. Langston available? Pete glanced toward the house, then back at her. He's in there. But miss, if you don't mind me saying, you might want to think twice about this. He's not been himself since. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Since he lost his family, Ruthie said gently. I know, but I still need to try. Pete nodded slowly. Well then, you seem like a decent sort. I'll pray for you both. The front door of the house was solid oak, painted black and fitted with brass hardware that had once been polished to a shine. Now it was tarnished and dull, like everything else about the place. Ruthie lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall 3 times. Footsteps echoed from insides low, deliberate, reluctant. When the door opened, Ruthie found herself face to face with Wade Langston. He was not what she'd expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair going grey at the temples and eyes, the colour of storm clouds. He might have been handsome once, but grief had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His clothes were clean but rumpled, his beard neatly trimmed but showing streaks of silver. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to care about himself. Mr. Langston, she said, keeping her voice steady, I'm Ruthie Bell Carter. I've come about the job. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You know what the job entails? Housekeeping and cooking. I'm capable of both. You know what happened to the last 3 women who took this job? They left, Ruthie said simply. I won't. Something flickered in his eye, surprise maybe, or skepticism. You're awfully sure of yourself for someone who's never worked here. I'm sure I need the work, and you need the help. Everything else we can figure out as we go." He stepped aside without a word, allowing her to enter. The house was magnificent high ceilings, polished wood floors, furniture that spoke of wealth and taste, but it felt cold, unlived in. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through tall windows. The silence was so complete it seemed to press against her eardrums. "Kitchen's through there," he said, nodding toward a doorway. "Your room would be upstairs, second door on the left. Job pays $30 a month, meals included. You can leave any time you want." "And you can dismiss me any time you want," Ruthie added. "I understand." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Fair enough. You want to see the kitchen?" The kitchen was a Marvella cast-iron stove that could feed an army, a pump handle that brought water right to the sink, and enough pots and pans to equip a hotel. But like the rest of the house, it felt abandoned. The surfaces were clean but unused, the cupboards stocked but untouched. "When did you last have a proper meal?" she asked, noting the sparse evidence of cooking. "I manage well enough." "That's not what I asked." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than indifference. "Are you always this direct?" "When it matters, yes. If you're going to pay me to keep house and cook, I need to know what I'm working with." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he said, "I eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired, work when there's work to be done. That's enough for me." "But is it living?" The question hung in the air between them. Wade's jaw tightened, and she saw his hands clench at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might order her to leave. Instead, he said, "I'll show you to your room. You can start tomorrow." As she followed him up the narrow staircase, Ruthie touched the cameo brooch at her throat. Whatever lay ahead, she was committed now. She'd found her place to make a stand, and she intended to make it count. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch. It was more than she'd had in months, and it felt like a gift. As Wade's footsteps retreated down the hall, she sat on the bed and allowed herself a moment of hope. Tomorrow, she would begin the work of bringing this house back to life. She would cook meals that filled the silence with sizzling and stirring, clean rooms that had been closed off from the world. And perhaps if she was very lucky, help a broken man remember what it felt like to be human. The sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ruthie Bell Carter had found her place at last, and she intended to make the most of it. Ruthie woke before dawn on her first morning at Blackbriar Ranch, as was her habit. The room was still dark, but she could hear the sounds of the ranch stirring horses nickering in the corral, old Pete's boots on the porch as he began his morning rounds. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses and made her way downstairs to the kitchen. The house felt different in the early morning light, less like a mausoleum and more like a home that had simply forgotten how to breathe. She lit the stove and set coffee to brewing, then began exploring the pantry to see what she had to work with. The supplies were good, better than she'd expected. Flour, sugar, preserved fruits, dried beans, and salt pork. Someone had been keeping the household stocked, even if they weren't using the ingredients. She could make a proper breakfast, the kind that would fill a working man, and maybe remind him that food was meant to be more than mere sustenance. She was mixing biscuit dough when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Wade appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed and ready for work despite the early hour. His hair was damp from washing, and he'd shaved. The simple acts of grooming made him look more human, less like the ghost who'd answered the door yesterday. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. Coffee's ready, and breakfast will be done shortly." He poured himself a cup and stood by the window, looking out at the ranch as the sun painted the sky pink and gold. "You don't need to cook for me. I'm used to making do." "Making do isn't the same as eating well," Ruthie replied, sliding the biscuits into the oven. "A man needs proper nutrition if he's going to work hard all day. I've been managing fine on my own." "Have you?" She turned to face him, noting the way his clothes hung loose on his frame, the hollow look around his eyes. "When was the last time you ate 3 meals in one day?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Ruthie scrambled eggs with care, adding a bit of cream she'd found in the cold cellar, and fried thick slices of bacon until they were crispy but not burned. When she set the plate before him, she saw his hands pause over the fork. "It's been a long time since someone cooked for me," he said quietly. "Then it's about time someone did." They ate in companionable silence. The only sounds, the clink of silverware and the morning chorus of birds outside. When Wade finished, he looked genuinely surprised, as if he'd forgotten what it felt like to be satisfied rather than simply fed. "Thank you," he said, and she heard something in his voice that hadn't been there the day before, hint of warmth, quickly banked but real nonetheless. After he left for his morning rounds, Ruthie began her real work. The house was large, 8 rooms on the ground floor, 6 upstairs, and while it was clean, it felt closed off, as if whole sections had been shut away from life. She started with the main floor, opening windows to let in fresh air and light, dusting furniture that gleamed under its coat of neglect. It was in the parlor that she found the first evidence of the family Wade had lost. A small rocking chair sat in one corner, child-sized and beautifully crafted. Beside it, a basket that might once have held toys now gathered dust. On the mantelpiece, spaces in the dust showed where photographs had once stood. The second floor was where the real ghosts lived. Wade's room was at the end of the hall, Spartanly furnished and rigidly neat, but it was the room next to his that made her breath catch in her throat. The door was closed, but not locked. When she turned the handle and stepped inside, she found herself in what had clearly been a nursery. A crib stood against one wall, its linen still neatly made. A changing table, a chest of drawers painted with cheerful animals, a shelf lined with picture books, and on the windowsill a small wooden horse that had been carved with infinite care and love. She picked up the toy, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It was exquisite work, every detail perfect, the flowing mane, the proud arch of the neck, the delicate legs. Someone had spent hours creating this, pouring love into every curve and line. Wade's work, she was certain, a father's gift to his son. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was sharp, cold, and very close behind her. Ruthie turned to find Wade in the doorway, his face a mask of fury and pain. She hadn't heard him come upstairs, hadn't heard his footsteps in the hall. "I was cleaning," she said calmly, though her heart was pounding. "Opening the house up, letting in some light. This room stays closed." His voice was barely controlled, each word precise and clipped. "It doesn't need cleaning. It doesn't need anything." "Mr. Langston, put that down." He was looking at the wooden horse in her hands, as if it were made of fire. "Put it down and get out." Ruthie set the toy gently back on the windowsill, but she didn't move toward the door. "This was your son's room." "Don't." The word came out strangled. "Don't talk about him." "What was his name?" Wade's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I said don't." "He was real, Mr. Langston. He lived here, in this room. He played with this horse you made for him. Pretending he never existed won't bring him back, but it won't honor his memory either. You don't know anything about it." His voice was raw now, the careful control slipping. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything that matters." "Don't I?" Ruthie's voice was gentle but firm. "You think I came here from a life of ease? You think I haven't lost people I loved?" He stared at her, and she saw the moment when he really looked at her, not just as an intrusion into his carefully maintained isolation, but as a person who might understand something about pain. "His name was Thomas," he said finally, the words seeming to tear themselves from his throat. "Tommy. He would have been 5 years old last month." "And your wife?" "Elizabeth." The name was barely a whisper. "She died bringing him into the world. Bled to death while I held her hand and promised her everything would be all right." His laugh was bitter, broken. 3 years we had with him. 3 years of watching him grow, teaching him to walk, listening to him laugh. Then the fever came, and there wasn't anything I could do. Nothing. Ruthie felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't fill the silence or warm the bed or give you a reason to get up in the morning. No, she agreed, it doesn't, but hiding from their memory doesn't help either. Wade's anger flared again. What would you have me do? Sit in here and torture myself with what I've lost? I'd have you remember that you loved them, and they loved you. I'd have you honor that love, instead of burying it with them. You've been here one day, he said coldly. One day, and you think you can tell me how to grieve? I think you've been grieving for 4 years, and it's eating you alive. She moved toward him slowly, as she might approach a wounded animal. I think you're so afraid of letting go of the pain that you've forgotten how to live. Maybe I don't want to live without them. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible in their honesty. Ruthie reached out and gently touched his arm. They wouldn't want that for you, she said softly. Would they? You're Elizabeth, you're Tommy Wood. They want you to stop living because they couldn't stay. Wade's face crumpled, and for a moment she thought he might break down entirely. Instead, he pulled himself together with visible effort, stepping back from her touch. Clean the rest of the house if you want, he said, his voice carefully controlled again. But leave this room alone. That's not a request. He left her standing in the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of love and loss. Ruthie looked around the room one more time, memorizing the details, the tiny clothes still folded in the drawers, the books with their pages unturned, the wooden horse that waited patiently on the windowsill for a little boy who would never come home. She understood now why Wade had become the man he was. He wasn't cruel by nature, he was broken. And broken things, she knew from experience, could be mended if someone cared enough to try. But first, he had to want to heal. And that, she realized, might be the hardest part of all. The days that followed their confrontation in the nursery settled into a careful rhythm. Wade treated Ruthie with polite distance, accepting her meals and cleaned house without comment. She, in turn, respected his unspoken boundaries, while quietly transforming the ranch house into something that resembled a home. It was while searching the kitchen for baking supplies that she discovered the leather-bound recipe book tucked behind a row of preserving jars. The pages were yellowed with age and stained with use, filled with careful handwriting in faded ink. Elizabeth Langston's Kitchen. Read the inscription on the first page. With love from Mother, 1859. Ruthie ran her fingers over the familiar recipes: cornbread, apple pie, pot roast with vegetables. These were the dishes that had once filled the house with warmth and the smell of home cooking. She could picture Elizabeth standing at this same stove, consulting these same pages as she prepared meals for her husband and son. That evening, she made Elizabeth's cornbread recipe, following the notes written in the margins. Add an extra pinch of salt, and Tommy likes it with honey butter. When she set the golden squares before Wade at dinner, she saw him pause, his fork halfway to his mouth. Where did you find that recipe? He asked quietly. In the kitchen. I hope you don't mind. I thought you might like a change from biscuits. He took a bite and closed his eyes, and she saw the grief wash over his face like a physical blow. She made this every Sunday after church, he said. Tommy would eat 3 pieces if we let him. Ruthie said nothing, letting him have the memory without intrusion. After a long moment, he opened his eyes and looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. It tastes exactly the same, he said. Good recipes are meant to be used, she replied gently. Your wife wouldn't want them gathering dust. Over the following weeks, Ruthie found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and mending, and used her afternoons to explore the property. The ranch was vast, nearly 3,000 acres of rolling hills and grassland, with a creek that wound through the center of the property. It was during one of these explorations that she met the horses. The Black Briar herd was magnificent, sleek quarter horses with intelligent eyes and proud bearing. They watched her approach with curiosity rather than fear, and when she extended her hand to the nearest mare, the animal sniffed delicately before allowing the touch. She likes you, old Pete said, appearing beside her with the quiet way he had. That's Rosie. She's particular about who she trusts. She's beautiful, Ruthie said, stroking the mare's neck. They all are. Mr. Wade's got an eye for horseflesh. These animals are his pride, what's left of it anyway. Pete adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. You mind me asking what you did before you came here? I helped run my father's farm before he died, Ruthie said. We raised cattle and horses. I know my way around livestock. That explains why they took to you so quick. Animals can sense when someone knows what they're about. He studied her with keen eyes. You thinking of staying? I hope to. Why? Because that man needs someone who won't give up on him. He's been alone too long, carrying all that grief by himself. It's turned him hard. Ruthie thought of Wade's face when he'd tasted Elizabeth's cornbread, the way he'd looked as if he were seeing ghosts. How long did you know his wife? From the day she came here as a bride. Sweet girl, gentle as summer rain. She could make Wade laugh, really laugh, not that bitter sound he makes now. And Tommy, Pete's voice softened. That boy was the light of his daddy's eyes. Wade taught him to ride before he could properly walk, carried him around the ranch on his shoulders every evening. A commotion from the direction of the main road interrupted their conversation. A rider was approaching at a hard gallop, dust billowing behind his horse. As he drew closer, Ruthie could see it was a young man, his face tight with urgency. "Pete," he called as he reined in his mount. "Where's Mr. Langston? I got news from town." Wade emerged from the barn, his expression immediately alert. "What is it, Jimmy?" "It's about the Becker place, sir. Silas Morton made an offer on it yesterday, cash money, full asking price. Old man Becker's thinking of selling." Wade's face went stone cold. "The hell he is. That land borders mine on the south." "Yes, sir. And word is, Morton's got his eye on more than just the Becker spread. He's been asking questions about property values, water rights, things like that." Ruthie saw Wade's hands clench into fists. "Silas Morton," he said, and the name sounded like a curse. "I should have known he'd show up eventually." "Who's Silas Morton?" Ruthie asked. Wade turned to her, his expression grim. "Someone I used to know. Someone I thought I'd left behind." He looked back at Jimmy. "Any word on whether Becker's decided?" "Not yet, sir. But Morton's been spreading money around town, making friends. Folks are saying he's got big plans for this area." After Jimmy left, Wade stood staring toward the southern boundary of his land, his jaw tight with tension. Ruthie approached him carefully. "This Morton here's bad news?" "The worst kind," Wade said without turning around. "We served together during the war. I saved his life once, which turned out to be the biggest mistake I ever made." He was quiet for a moment. "Silas doesn't just want land. He wants to own everything and everyone around him. If he gets a foothold here, what will you do?" Wade's smile was cold and humorless. "I'll fight him, same as I should have done years ago." That evening, as Ruthie prepared dinner using another of Elizabeth's recipes, beef stew with dumplings, she found herself thinking about what Pete had told her about Wade's life before tragedy struck. It was hard to imagine the grim, silent man she knew as someone who had laughed easily and carried his son around the ranch. When she served the stew, she noticed Wade barely touched his food. His mind was clearly elsewhere, focused on the threat that Silas Morton represented. "The recipe says this was Tommy's favorite," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Wade looked up, surprised. "She wrote that in the book?" "She wrote a lot of things, little notes about what you both liked, suggestions for special occasions. She wanted to make sure her recipes would keep your family fed and happy." "She never imagined she wouldn't be here to cook them herself," Wade said, his voice heavy with old pain. "Maybe not, but she made sure you'd have a piece of her love in every meal, even if she couldn't be here to serve it herself." Wade was quiet for a long time, staring down at his bowl. Finally, he said, "Morton won't stop with the Becker place. Once he gets established here, he'll come after everything else, including this ranch." "Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't get established," Ruthie said simply. Wade looked at her with surprise. "We? I have a stake in this place now, too," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "This is my home, Mr. Langston. I won't let anyone take it away without a fight." For the first time since she'd arrived, Wade almost smiled. "You might be more trouble than I bargained for, Miss Carter." "I certainly hope so," she replied, and this time he did Smiley a real one, small but genuine, like the first hint of sunrise after a long, dark night. The following Sunday, Ruthie discovered Wade in his workshop behind the barn. She'd been looking for him to ask about supplies for canning the late apples when she heard the rhythmic sound of wood being shaped. Through the open door, she could see him bent over a workbench, his hands moving with practiced skill over a piece of oak. The workshop was a revelation shelves lined with hand tools kept in perfect order, half-finished projects covered in cloth, and in one corner a collection of completed works that took her breath away. There were picture frames carved with intricate designs, a jewelry box inlaid with different woods, and a rocking chair that would have been at home in the finest parlor. Wade looked up as she approached, his hands stilling on the carving tools. He began, then stopped, as if he couldn't explain what he was doing there. "This is beautiful work," Ruthie said, running her hand along the arm of the rocking chair. "You made all of this?" He nodded, his expression guarded. "It's just something to do with my hands, keeps me busy." But Ruthie could see it was more than that. In the careful attention to detail, the hours of patient work, she recognized a man trying to create something lasting and beautiful in a world that had shown him too much loss and destruction. On the workbench, she could see what he was currently crafting, a small wooden cross, the grain of the wood polished to a warm glow. The proportions were perfect, the carving delicate but strong. "This is for their graves," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Wade's hands tightened on the tools. "The ones the church put up were store-bought, plain. They deserved better." "They did," she agreed. "This is beautiful. They would be honored." He looked at her with surprise, as if he'd expected criticism or pity instead of understanding. "You don't think it's foolish, making something for people who can't see it?" "I think love doesn't end with death," Ruthie said simply, "and I think creating something beautiful in their memory is one of the finest ways to honor them." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the workshop windows and warming the wood shavings that covered the floor. "I should let you get back to your work," Ruthie said finally. "I just wanted to ask about supplies for preserving the apples." "Take whatever you need from the pantry," Wade said, and Ruthie. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Thank you for understanding." That evening brought unexpected visitors. Ruthie was cleaning up after dinner when she heard horses approaching the house. Through the window, she could see two riders, a man and a woman, both well-dressed and unfamiliar. Wade answered the door, and Ruthie heard his sharp intake of breath. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't expecting you." "Hello, Wade." The woman's voice was cultured, with a slight accent that spoke of eastern cities and finishing schools. "May we come in?" Ruthie stepped into the hallway as Wade led his guests to the parlor. The woman was beautiful in a delicate way, with golden hair arranged in the latest fashion and a traveling dress that had probably cost more than Ruthie made in a year. The man with her was older, distinguished, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Ruthie, this is Sarah Morrison. Sarah Whitman, no, and her husband, Charles," Wade said stiffly. "Sarah, Charles, this is Miss Carter, my housekeeper." Sarah's eyes swept over Ruthie with polite assessment. "How lovely to meet you, Miss Carter. We're old friends of Wade's from before the war." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Wade stood apart from his guests, his posture rigid, while Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa as if she might take flight at any moment. "We're traveling through to San Antonio," Charles said, clearly trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Thought we'd stop and see how you're getting along." "I'm getting along fine," Wade replied curtly. "The ranch looks prosperous," Sarah said, glancing around the parlor. "You've done well for yourself." "Have I?" Wade's smile was bitter. "Depends on how you measure success, I suppose." Ruthie excused herself to prepare refreshments, but she could hear the conversation from the kitchen. It became clear that Sarah had been more than just a friend. There was a history there, complicated and painful. "I heard about Elizabeth and the baby," Sarah was saying when Ruthie returned with coffee. "I'm so sorry, Wade. I know how much you wanted a family." Wade's face went pale. "Did you? I seem to remember you thought I was too serious about settling down. Wasn't that what you said when you broke our engagement?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "That was different," she said quietly. "We were both young. I wasn't ready for a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a man who had nothing but dreams and determination." Wade finished. "I remember." Charles cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss something else." "Actually," Sarah said, lifting her chin with apparent resolution, "there is something else. Wade, I heard about Silas Morton's interest in this area. Charles has business connection. She might be able to help you if Morton becomes a problem." Wade's expression hardened. "I can handle Morton myself." "You don't understand," Sarah insisted. "He's not the same man you knew during the war. He's become powerful, ruthless. He destroys people who stand in his way." "Let him try," Wade said flatly. "Wade, please?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes earnest. "I made a mistake years ago. I chose security over love, and I've regretted it every day since. When I heard what happened to your family, what you've been through," she paused, seeming to gather courage. "Charles and we're not happy. We could start over, somewhere new, together." The silence that followed was deafening. Ruthie felt her heart stop, her hands frozen around the coffee pot she was holding. This beautiful, refined woman was offering Wade exactly what Ruthie could never give him: a chance to reclaim his past, to be with someone who belonged in his world. Wade stood slowly, his face carved from stone. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Wade." Now. His voice was final, absolute. "You made your choice 8 years ago, Sarah. I made mine when I married Elizabeth. She's gone, but that doesn't mean I'm available for your regrets." Sarah's face crumpled. "But you're all alone here. This isn't living, Wade. This is just existing." "Maybe so," Wade replied, "but it's my choice to make." After they left, Wade stood at the window, watching their carriage disappear into the gathering dusk. Ruthie began clearing the coffee service, her hands shaking slightly. "You don't have to clean that now," Wade said without turning around. "It's all right, I don't mind." "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" His voice was thoughtful, distant. "Everything a man is supposed to want." Ruthie's throat tightened. "Yes, she was. 8 years ago, I thought I'd die when she left me. Thought my life was over before it had really begun." He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "Strange how life works out. If she'd stayed, I never would have met Elizabeth, never would have had Tommy, even for such a short time." "And you wouldn't be here now," Ruthie said softly. "No," he agreed. "I wouldn't be here now, and that would be a shame, because I'm beginning to think this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Their eyes met across the lamplit room, and Ruthie felt something shift between theme recognition, a possibility that neither of them was quite ready to name. Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change. October brought cooler mornings and the kind of golden light that made everything on the ranch look like it had been painted by an artist's careful hand. Ruthie had been at Blackbriar for 6 weeks, and the transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The house felt lived in again, filled with the sounds of daily life, the clatter of dishes, the whistle of the kettle, the soft humming that accompanied Ruthie's work. It was while organizing Wade's desk that she found the photograph tucked between the pages of a ledger book. The image was faded but clear. Wade in his younger days, standing proudly beside a woman of ethereal beauty who held a chubby baby in her arms. Elizabeth and Tommy, captured in a moment of perfect happiness. Wade was younger in the photograph, his face unlined by grief, his smile genuine and full of hope. Elizabeth was everything Sarah Morrison had been, and more delicate features, kind eyes, and an expression of contentment that spoke of a woman deeply in love with her life. The baby Tommy was laughing, his tiny hands reaching toward the camera. "You found it." Ruthie turned to find Wade in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She'd been so absorbed in the photograph that she hadn't heard him enter. "I'm sorry," she said, moving to put it back. "I wasn't prying, it just fell out when I was—" "It's all right." He moved closer, his eyes fixed on the image. "I'd forgotten I put it there." "They were beautiful," Ruthie said softly. "Yes, they were." Wade took the photograph from her hands, his fingers careful not to smudge the surface. "This was taken just before I left for my last cattle drive. Tommy was 18 months old, just starting to walk. Elizabeth was." He paused, swallowing hard. "She was carrying our second child then, though we didn't know it yet." Ruthie felt her heart clench. "What happened?" "I was gone for 3 months. When I came back, she was so sick she could barely stand. Lost the baby at 4 months. His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. The doctor said her body never recovered. That's why Tommy's birth was so hard on her, why she didn't survive it." "You blame yourself." It wasn't a question, and Wade didn't deny it. "If I hadn't left for that drive, if I'd been here when she got sick, maybe things would have been different. Or maybe they wouldn't have been," Ruthie said gently. "Sometimes loss just is, Wade. Sometimes there's no one to blame, no way to change what happened." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You sound like someone who knows." Ruthie hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was engaged once. To a good man, a kind man who loved me despite my father's debts. But his family, they had other plans for him. They convinced him I was only after his money, that I'd bring scandal to their name." She touched the cameo at her throat. "When the accusations started flying in town, he believed them. Cast me aside like I was nothing." "What accusations?" "That I'd been carrying on with a married man. That I was a woman of loose morals who couldn't be trusted." Her voice was steady, but Wade could hear the old hurt beneath the calm. "It wasn't true, but truth doesn't matter when people want to believe the worst about you." Wade set the photograph carefully on the desk and turned to face her fully. "Is that why you left?" "Twice. Each time I thought I could start fresh. Each time the rumors followed me. Some stories have a way of growing in the telling." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not what people in town think I am, Wade. But I'm not the innocent girl I was before all this started either. Scandal changes a person, hardens them." "Good," Wade said firmly. "Innocent girls don't last long in this world. Women with steel in their backbone do." Something warm unfurled in Ruthie's chest at his words. "Is that what you think I have? Steel in my backbone?" "Among other things." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "You stayed when Sarah offered me what she thought was a better life. You could have used that moment to point out your own qualities, to make me see you as more than just the housekeeper. Instead, you let me make my own choice." "Because anything else wouldn't have been real," Ruthie said. "I want to be chosen, Wade, not settled for because I'm convenient or because there's no one else." They stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he reached out and touched her cheek with his calloused fingertips. "You're not convenient," he said softly. "You're necessary. There's a difference." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Wade stepped back, his expression shifting to alertness as he moved to the window. "3 riders," he said grimly, "coming fast." They went outside together, Wade's hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. The riders were familiar Jimmy from town, along with 2 other young men, Ruthie recognized from the general store. "Mr. Langston," Jimmy called as he dismounted. "You need to know Silas Morton bought the Becker place, paid cash, closed the deal this afternoon." Wade's face went stone cold. "What else?" "He's been asking questions about water rights, about who owns what along the creek. And, sir," Jimmy paused, looking uncomfortable, "he's been asking about you specifically. About your finances, your debts, whether you might be interested in selling." "The hell I would be." That's what folks told him, but he just smiled. Said everyone has a price, and he has ways of finding out what it is. After the men left, Wade stood staring toward the southern boundary where the Becker place lay. The evening was cooling rapidly, and Ruthie could see tension in every line of his body. "What will you do?" she asked. "Whatever I have to." His voice was flat, controlled. "Morton thinks he can intimidate me into selling. He's about to learn otherwise." "Wade." She touched his arm gently. "What happened between you two during the war?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "We were part of a reconnaissance unit, deep in Confederate territory, got separated from our unit during a retreat. Morton was wounded, couldn't travel fast." Wade's hands clenched into fists. "I had a choice: leave him behind and save myself, or stay and risk both our lives. You stayed." "I stayed. Carried him 20 miles through enemy territory. Nearly got us both killed doing it." His laugh was bitter. "Should have left him behind. Would have saved a lot of people, a lot of trouble." "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" Wade turned to face her, his eyes hard. "You don't know Silas like I do, Ruthie. He's not just ruthless, she's poison. Everything he touches dies. And now he's here, on my land, threatening everything I have left." Ruthie saw something in his expression that worried, her coldness that spoke of old violence barely held in check. "Promise me something," she said. "What?" "Promise me you won't do anything stupid, that you won't let your anger make decisions for you." Wade was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dying light. "You're worried about me." "Yes, I am." "Why?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to voice. Ruthie felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Because you matter to me," she said simply, "more than I probably should admit." Wade's expression softened, the hardness melting away like frost in morning sun. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing gently across her cheekbones. "Ruthie," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, she didn't pull away. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, tasting of coffee and something indefinably masculine. The kiss was tender, questioning, and when she responded by rising on her toes to deepen it, she felt him sigh against her mouth. When they finally broke apart, they remained close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "I haven't felt this way since Elizabeth," Wade whispered. "I didn't think I could feel this way again." "I never felt this way at all," Ruthie admitted. "What I thought was love before it was nothing compared to this." Wade pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious. "I can't promise you an easy life, Ruthie. Morton's going to make trouble, and I'm not an easy man to love. I'm scarred, set in my ways, and I carry more grief than any one person should. And I'm a woman with a ruined reputation who takes jobs nobody else wants." Ruthie replied with a small smile. "Seems like we're well matched in our imperfections." He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. "When you put it like that." "Wade," she said, growing serious again, "whatever comes with Morton, we'll face it together. But promise me you won't let the past make you into someone you're not. Promise me you'll choose healing over revenge." Wade searched her eyes, seeing the strength and determination that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I promise," he said finally, "but if he threatens you, all bets are off." "Fair enough," Ruthie said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge overlooking the ranch. Silas Morton sat his horse in the gathering darkness, his face twisted with fury and something that might have been envy. He'd expected to find Wade broken and isolated, easy prey for the plans he'd been nurturing for years. Instead, he'd found a man who was healing, who had someone worth fighting for. That would have to change. The first frost came early that year, painting the grass silver and making the horse's breath visible in the crisp morning air. Ruthie woke to find Wade already gone from the kitchen, though he'd left the coffee brewing and a note propped against the sugar bowl. "Gone to check the south pasture. Back by noon. W." She smiled at the small consideration, evidence of how their relationship had deepened in the weeks since their first kiss. They moved around each other now with the easy familiarity of a couple long married, yet every touch still carried the thrill of newness. It was while hanging laundry that she noticed the rider approaching from the direction of town. Not one of Wade's usual visitors, but a well-dressed stranger on a fine horse. As he drew closer, she could see he was a handsome man in his 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Carter, I presume," he said, dismounting with practiced ease. "I'm Silas Morton. I believe you work for Wade Langston." So this was the man who had Wade so worried. Up close, Morton was impressive vettel and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that was probably charming when it was genuine. Now it felt calculated, predatory. "Mr. Morton," Ruthie said, keeping her voice neutral. "Wade isn't here at the moment." "Actually, it's you I wanted to speak with." Morton's smile widened. "I've heard interesting things about you around town. How you've brought some life back to this place made Wade almost human again." "I'm just the housekeeper," Ruthie said carefully. "Are you?" Morton's eyes were shrewd, assessing. "From what I've observed, you're considerably more than that. Wade Langston doesn't strike me as a man who forms casual attachments." Ruthie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "What do you want, Mr. Morton?" "Direct. I like that in a woman." Morton moved closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her skin crawl. "I want to make you an offer, Miss Carter, a generous one." "I'm not interested in—" "Hear me out," Morton interrupted, his tone becoming more businesslike. "I know about your past. The scandal in Virginia, the accusations of adultery, the way you've been run out of 2 towns. It must be exhausting, always looking over your shoulder, wondering when your reputation will catch up with you again." Ruthie's blood ran cold. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things about people who interest me. And you, my dear, are very interesting." Morton pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have here a sworn statement from a man named Richard Pemberton, your former fiancé, I believe. In it, he details your, shall we say, flexible moral standards. Quite damaging, really." Ruthie's hands trembled as she recognized the name. Richard, the man who had claimed to love her before casting her aside when his family demanded it. "That's a lie. Whatever he said." "Truth is subjective, Miss Carter. What matters is what people believe." Morton's smile was sharp as a blade. "Imagine how the good people of Cedar Falls would react to learning about their local scandal. Imagine how Wade would react. Wade knows about my past." "Does he? Does he know about the hotel room in Richmond? About the compromising position you were found in? About the married man who swore you seduced him?" Morton's voice was silk over steel. "I think not. Men can be very forgiving of a woman's imagined indiscretions, but concrete evidence of moral failing, well, that's different." Ruthie lifted her chin, drawing on every ounce of strength she possessed. "What do you want?" "I want you to convince Wade to sell this ranch to me. You have influence over him, use it. In return, I'll ensure your past stays buried. You can start fresh somewhere else, with enough money to live comfortably. And if I refuse—" Morton's mask of civility slipped, revealing something cold and ugly beneath. "Then I'll destroy you both. Wade first, by showing him exactly what kind of woman he's been harboring. Then you, by making sure every decent family between here and the Mexican border knows what you really are. You're despicable." "I'm practical," Morton corrected. "Wade has something I want, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to get it. You're just leverage, Miss Carter. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize a good deal when you see one." "Get off this property," Ruthie said, her voice shaking with rage. "Now." Morton shrugged, apparently unconcerned by her anger. "I'll give you a week to think it over. After that, I start sharing Richard Pemberton's very detailed recollections with the local newspapers." He mounted his horse with fluid grace. "Oh, and Miss Carter, I wouldn't mention this conversation to Wade if I were you. Men can be so unpredictable when they feel they've been deceived." After he rode away, Ruthie sank onto the porch steps, her legs too weak to support her. The paper Morton had shown her was still folded in his hand, but she'd seen enough to know it bore Richard's signature. Whatever lies he'd told, whatever twisted version of events he'd created, it would be enough to destroy Herond Wade's faith in her along with it. She was still sitting there when Wade returned an hour later, his face immediately creasing with concern when he saw her pale complexion. "What's wrong?" he asked, dismounting quickly and coming to her side. "Nothing," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. The cold makes my bones ache." Wade studied her face, clearly not convinced. "You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way she had, the ghost of her past, risen to haunt her just when she'd finally found happiness. But she couldn't tell Wade that. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to fight Morton without losing everything she'd come to love. "I'm fine," she repeated, accepting Wade's hand as he helped her to her feet. "Just need some warmth and hot coffee." That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Wade seemed unusually pensive. He kept glancing at her as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Ruthie," he said finally, "there's something I want to show you." He disappeared upstairs and returned with a small wooden box, the kind used to store precious things. With careful hands, he opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age, but beautiful in its simplicity. "This was Elizabeth's," he said quietly. "Her mother gave it to her on our wedding day." Inside, he opened the locket to reveal a pressed flower, brown with age but still recognizable as a rose. From her wedding bouquet. Ruthie felt tears sting her eyes. "Wade, why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to have it." His voice was steady, but she could see the emotion in his eyes. "Elizabeth is gone, Ruthie. She's been gone for 4 years, and I've spent all that time trying to hold on to her memory so tight that I forgot how to live. But you've taught me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone old." He took the locket from the box and moved behind her, fastening it around her neck with gentle fingers. "I love you, Ruthie Bell Carter. Not because you remind me of Elizabeth, but because you're you. Strong and stubborn and brave enough to take a job nobody else wanted." Ruthie touched the locket, feeling its weight against her throat like a promise. "I love you too," she whispered, and for a moment, Morton's threat seemed like distant thunder, ominous, but not immediate. But as Wade kissed her goodnight and headed upstairs, Ruthie remained by the dying fire, one hand on the locket and her heart heavy with secrets. She had 6 days to find a way to protect the man she loved from the truth about her pastor, watch their newfound happiness crumble into dust. The answer came to Ruthie in the most unexpected place, Wade's father's old desk in the study. She'd been avoiding the room since Morton's visit 3 days earlier, unable to concentrate on anything but the ticking clock that counted down to her deadline. But this morning, desperate for something to occupy her hands while her mind raced, she'd decided to tackle the task Wade had been putting off for months, organizing his father's papers. Marcus Langston had been a meticulous man, apparently. Every document was carefully labeled and filed, from cattle purchase receipts going back 20 years to correspondence with lawyers in Austin. Ruthie was sorting through a stack of legal documents when her fingers found something unexpected, a thick envelope wedged between the back of a drawer and the desk frame, as if it had been deliberately hidden. The envelope was addressed to Wade in his father's careful handwriting, with a note, to be opened only in case of legal challenge to the ranch. The seal was unbroken, the paper yellowed with age. Ruthie stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. Wade was out checking on the cattle with old Pete and wouldn't be back for hours. Whatever was in this envelope, Marcus Langston had thought it important enough to hide, important enough to leave specific instructions about when it should be opened. A legal challenge to the ranch, like what Silas Morton was threatening. With trembling fingers, Ruthie broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. The first was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, dated just months before his death. "Wade, if you're reading this, then someone is trying to take what's ours. I should have told you this years ago, but I was proud and stubborn, and I thought the truth would stay buried with me. I was wrong. When you were born, your mother was very ill. We thought we might lose her, and in my desperation, I made arrangements I probably shouldn't have. I had the ranch put in trust not to you, as everyone believes, but to your firstborn son. I thought it would protect the land from creditors if something happened to me, and I planned to change it back once your mother recovered. But then the war came, and you left, and I kept putting it off. By the time Tommy was born, I realized the trust might actually be the best protection the ranch could have. A child can't be forced to sell land the way a man can be pressured or threatened. The legal documents are all here. Tommy was the true owner of Blackbriar Ranch from the day he was born until the day he died. Now that he's gone, the land reverts to you, but not in the way most people would expect. You inherit it as Tommy's father and closest living relative, which means any sale would require the approval of the county court and a determination that it's in the best interests of the estate. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, son. I thought I was protecting you, but I may have just made things more complicated. Use this knowledge wisely. Ruthie read the letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. Wade wasn't just the owner of Blackbriar Ranch, he was the guardian of his deceased son's estate. Any forced sale would have to go through the courts, and judges were notoriously protective of children's interests, even deceased children. The other documents in the envelope confirmed everything Marcus had written: trust agreements, court filings, even a copy of Tommy's birth certificate with a notation about the land inheritance. It was all legal, all properly executed, and all completely unknown to Wade. She was still staring at the papers when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she could see Wade riding hard toward the house, his face grim. Behind him, 3 other ridersmen she didn't recognize. Ruthie quickly gathered the documents and rushed outside. Wade was already dismounting, his hand resting on his gun. "Get inside," he called to her. "Lock the doors." "What's happening?" "Morton's men. They've been harassing the cattle, trying to stampede them toward the creek. When Pete and I rode out to stop them, they said they had orders to make sure we understood Morton's serious about his offer." The 3 riders had stopped at the edge of the yard, close enough to be threatening but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. They were hard-looking men, the kind who made their living with violence. "Mr. Langston," one of them called, "Mr. Morton wants to know if you've given more thought to his generous offer." "You can tell Morton he can go to hell," Wade replied, his voice deadly calm. "Now, that's not very neighborly," the man said with a nasty smile. "Maybe you need more time to think, maybe some incentive." One of the other riders pulled out a torch, already lit. "Nice barn you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it." Wade's gun was in his hand faster than Ruthie could follow the movement. "Light one building on this ranch, and I'll put a bullet in you before the flame catches." "3 of us, 1 of you," the first man observed. "You might get 1, maybe 2, but not all of us. Want to test that theory?" The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Ruthie could see the calculation in the men's eyes, weighing their orders against their lives. Finally, the leader raised his hand. "We're not here to start a war today," he said. "Just delivering a message. Mr. Morton's patience is running thin. He expects an answer soon." After they rode away, Wade remained in the yard, his gun still drawn. Ruthie approached him carefully. "Wade," she said softly, "there's something you need to see." She led him into the study and handed him his father's letter. She watched his face change as he read, saw the moment when understanding dawned. "The ranch was Tommy's," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "All this time, it belonged to my son." "Which means Morton can't force you to sell," Ruthie said. "Any sale would have to be approved by the courts, and they'll want to make sure it's in Tommy's best interest 7, though he's gone." Wade sat down heavily in his father's chair, the letter still in his hands. "All these years, I thought I'd lost everything when they died. But Tommy, even in death, he's still protecting this place." "Your father was a wise man," Ruthie said. "He knew this day might come." Wade looked up at her, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "This changes everything. Morton's threats, his pressure tactics, none of it matters now. He can't take the ranch through intimidation or legal manipulation." "No," Ruthie agreed, "he can't." But even as she said it, a chill ran down her spine. Morton wasn't the kind of man to give up easily, and when legal means failed him, he might turn to other methods. The torch his man had carried wasn't just for show, it was a promise of what could happen if Wade continued to resist. "We need to get these documents to a lawyer," Wade said, carefully folding the letter. "Make sure everything's properly recorded and filed, and we need to let people in town know about this. The more people who understand the legal situation, the harder it'll be for Morton to—" He stopped, his eyes focusing on something over Ruthie's shoulder. She turned to see smoke rising from the direction of the south pasture. "Son of a bitch," Wade snarled, grabbing his hat and heading for the door. "They fired the grass." Ruthie followed him outside and saw the danger immediately. A grass fire in October, when everything was dry as tinder, could sweep across the entire ranch in hours. If it reached the buildings, if it got to the hay stored in the barn— "Get the buckets from the kitchen," Wade shouted, already running toward the barn. "Fill anything that holds water. I'll get the horses." As Ruthie raced to follow his instructions, she realized this was exactly what Morton had planned. He couldn't force Wade to sell through legal means, but he could burn him out. Destroy the ranch, the cattle, the buildings, everything that made the land valuable, then offer to buy the scorched earth for a fraction of its worth. The wind was picking up, pushing the fire toward the heart of the ranch. In the distance, she could see old Pete riding hard toward them, his face black with soot. The battle for Blackbriar Ranch had begun, and Morton had drawn first blood. But as she filled bucket after bucket with precious water, Ruthie felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. They had the law on their side now, and more importantly, they had something worth fighting for. Tommy's legacy would not be allowed to burn, not if she and Wade had anything to say about it. The war was far from over, but the first skirmish would be theirs. The fire took them 6 hours to contain, and by the time the last ember was stamped out, they'd lost nearly 100 acres of prime grazing land. Wade stood at the edge of the burned area, his face streaked with soot, surveying the damage with grim resignation. "Could have been worse," old Pete said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Could have taken the whole ranch." "This time," Wade replied. "Morton's just getting started." Ruthie watched him from where she sat on a fallen log, too exhausted to stand. Her dress was ruined, her hands blistered from carrying buckets, but she felt oddly triumphant. They'd saved the buildings, saved the cattle, saved what mattered most. The land would recover, grass grew back, fences could be rebuilt. "We need help," she said quietly. "We can't fight Morton alone." Wade's jaw tightened. "I won't ask other people to risk their lives for my problems." "This isn't just your problem anymore," Pete said. "Morton gets a foothold here. He'll go after every small rancher in the county. Folks know that, even if they're scared to say it out loud. Besides," Ruthie added, "you might not have to ask." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses reached them. A group of riders was coming up the main road, not Morton's hired guns this time, but local men, some of whom Ruthie recognized from town. The leader was a grizzled man in his 60s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life working the land. He dismounted and approached Wade, with the careful respect of one equal greeting another. "Wade," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Tom Harrison, own the spread about 10 miles north of here." Wade shook the offered hand, his expression wary. "Tom, what brings you out this way?" "Heard about your trouble, saw the smoke from my place." Harrison gestured toward the other men. "We came to help, but looks like you got it handled." "For now," Wade replied. "But Morton's not done." "No, I expect he's not." Harrison's face was grim. "That's why we're here. Silas Morton's been sniffing around my place too, asking questions about water rights and property values. Man's got big plans, and none of them are good for folks like us." One of the other men stepped forward, a younger fellow with calloused hands and honest eyes. "Name's Jake Miller. I run cattle on the creek bottom east of here. Morton made me an offer last week, said if I didn't take it, I might not get another chance." "How many of you has he approached?" Wade asked. "Near everyone with decent land," Harrison said. "He's patient, I'll give him that. Friendly as pie when he makes his first offer. But there's something in his eyes." The older man shuddered. "Something cold." Wade was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he said, "There's something you all should know, something that changes the situation considerably." He told them about the trust documents, about Tommy's legal ownership of the ranch, about the protection that provided against forced sale. As he spoke, Ruthie could see hope dawning on the men's faces. "So he can't just pressure you into selling," Jake said, his voice excited. "Has to go through the courts." "That's right, which means his intimidation tactics are pointless legally speaking." "But he doesn't know that yet," Harrison observed. "Does he?" Wade's smile was sharp as a blade. "No, he doesn't." "Then we have an advantage," another man said. "Question is, how do we use it?" They spent the next hour planning, the men sharing information about Morton's activities throughout the county. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Morton wasn't just interested in buying land. He was systematically targeting anyone who might oppose him, using a combination of legal pressure, economic coercion, and outright intimidation. "He's got backing," Harrison said grimly, "more money than any of us can match. And those hired guns of his, they're not just ranch hands, they're professionals." "All the more reason to stick together," Wade replied. "He can't intimidate all of us at once." But even as he said it, Ruthie could see the worry in his eyes. These were good men, honest men, but they were ranchers and farmers, not gunfighters. If Morton decided to escalate beyond legal pressure and economic warfare, after the men left, promising to keep in touch and watch each other's backs, Wade and Ruthie walked back toward the house in the gathering dusk. The acrid smell of burned grass hung in the air, a reminder of how quickly things could turn dangerous. "There's something else we need to discuss," Wade said as they reached the porch. "Morton's not going to stop with property damage. When he realizes legal pressure won't work, he's going to get personal." Ruthie's stomach clenched, thinking of the papers Morton claimed to have, the threats he'd made about her past. "What do you mean?" "I mean he'll look for weaknesses, things he can use against us, people we care about, secrets we want to keep hidden." Wade stopped and turned to face her. "Ruthie, if there's anything in your past that could be used against you against use, I need to know about it." The moment she'd been dreading had arrived. Ruthie looked into Wade's honest grey eyes and felt her heart break a little. "Wade, whatever it is, we can face it together, but I need to know what we're up against." She took a deep breath and told him everything, about Richard Pemberton and his family's objections to their engagement, about the accusations of adultery, the rumors that had followed her from town to town, about Morton's visit and his threats to expose her past. Wade listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "These accusations," he said finally, "are they true?" Ruthie met his gaze steadily. "No, but the evidence Morton claims to have it might be convincing enough to destroy my reputation completely. And yours, by association." Wade's hands clenched into fists. "Son of a bitch came here while I was gone, threatened you in your own home." "Our home," Ruthie corrected gently. "And yes, he did. But Wade, you have to understand I never slept with anyone before you. The whole thing was a lie, a way for Richard's family to get rid of me without looking like the villains." "I believe you," Wade said without hesitation. "But Morton's right about one thing. Truth doesn't matter if people want to believe a lie. We need to get ahead of this." "How?" Wade was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face lit up with something that might have been inspiration. "We tell the truth first. All of it. Let people know exactly who you are and how you came to be here before Morton can poison the well." "Wade, that's smart," he interrupted. "Think about it, Ruthie. People in Cedar Falls have seen you work, seen the woman you are. They respect you. If they hear your story from us, with all the context and truth intact, Morton's lies won't have nearly the same impact." Ruthie felt a spark of hope. "You really think that would work?" "I think it's our best chance. And I think," Wade paused, seeming to gather courage, "I think it's time I made an honest woman of you." Ruthie's breath caught. "Wade?" He dropped to one knee right there on the porch, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. Ruthie Bell Carter, you took a job nobody wanted and gave me back my life. You're brave and strong and stubborn as a mule, and I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? Through her tears, Ruthie could see the love shining in his eyes, the absolute certainty that this was right. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Wade stood and kissed her then, long and thorough, and for a moment the world fell away. Morton's threats, the burned pasture, the dangers that lay ahead. There was only this: two people who had found each other against all odds, preparing to face whatever came next together. But even as they held each other, both of them knew the hardest fight was still ahead. Morton wouldn't give up easily, and when he learned about the trust documents that protected the ranch, he would become truly dangerous. In his room at the Cedar Falls Hotel, Silas Morton sat at his desk, writing carefully in a leather-bound journal. The grass fire had been a warning shot, nothing more. If Wade Langston thought a little property damage would be the end of it, he was gravely mistaken. Morton had not come this far, invested this much time and money, to be defeated by sentiment and stubbornness. Wade had something Morton wanted, something he'd been planning to acquire for years. The fact that Wade had found love again, had started to rebuild his life, only made the eventual victory sweeter. Tomorrow, he would begin the real campaign, and when it was over, Wade Langston would understand that some wounds never truly healed, they just waited for the right moment to be torn open again. Morton smiled as he closed the journal. The game was about to get much more interesting. The attack came at midnight on a moonless November night. Ruthie woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses screaming in terror. Through the bedroom window, she could see an orange glow that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Wade!" she shouted, shaking him awake. "The barnet's on fire!" Wade was up and moving before he was fully conscious, pulling on his pants and boots with practiced efficiency. "Get dressed," he ordered. "Stay low, and whatever happens, don't leave the house unless I tell you to." "I'm not hiding while—" "Ruthie." His voice was sharp, commanding. "This isn't just a fire. This is an attack. Morton's making his move, and I need to know you're safe." Through the window, they could see old Pete running toward the barn with buckets, his slight figure dwarfed by the towering flames. The horses were loose in the corral, milling in panic, as sparks rained down around them. Wade grabbed his rifle from the gun cabinet and checked the load. "If anyone comes to the house, anyone you don't recognize, you know where the shotgun is." Before Ruthie could respond, he was gone, running toward the inferno that had been their barn. She dressed quickly and took up position at the front window, the shotgun heavy in her hands. The barn was beyond saving. The dry wood and stored hay had created a conflagration that could probably be seen for miles. But the horses, they could still save the horses if they moved fast enough. Wade was already in the corral, moving with calm efficiency despite the chaos around him. He caught the lead mare, Rosie, and began leading the other animals toward the safety of the far pasture. Old Pete was right behind him, his face grim with determination. That's when Ruthie saw the riders. 6 men approached from the direction of town, their faces hidden by bandanas, their intentions clear in the way they spread out to surround the ranch house. Morton had chosen his moment well, with Wade and Pete fighting the fire. The house was essentially undefended. The front door exploded inward just as Ruthie raised the shotgun. The first man through caught the full blast in the chest and went down without a sound. The second man dove aside, his own weapon coming up. "Drop it, lady, or we'll burn this place down around you." Ruthie pumped another shell into the chamber. "Like you haven't tried that already." The standoff lasted only seconds before Wade's voice cut through the night like a whip crack. "You boys are trespassing on private property." The remaining men turned to find Wade and Pete flanking them, rifles trained on their positions. In the firelight, Wade looked like an avenging angel, his face set in hard lines, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Morton sent you," Wade said. It wasn't a question. One of the men, braver or stupider than the other, spoke up. "Mr. Morton just wants what's fair. You sell him the ranch, nobody else gets hurt." "Nobody else?" Wade's voice was deadly calm. "What about my barn? My hay? My horses that could have died because of your arson." "That was just persuasion," the man said. "This here's the real deal. You got until dawn to decide sell to Mr. Morton, or watch everything you love burn." Wade stepped closer, his rifle never wavering. "Here's my counteroffer. You get off my land right now, and I don't put bullets in all of you." "3 of us. 2 of you," another man said. "Them ain't good odds." "You're forgetting about me," Ruthie said from the doorway, the shotgun steady in her hands. "And you're forgetting that this is our home. We'll defend it." The leader of Morton's men looked around nervously. What had seemed like a simple intimidation job was turning into something much more dangerous. Behind them, the barn continued to burn, but the horses were safe, and the house showed no signs of catching fire. "This ain't over," he said finally, gesturing to his remaining men. "Morton's got lawyers, got money, got influence. He'll find a way." "Tell Morton something for me," Wade said as the men began backing toward their horses. "Tell him that Tommy Langston's father doesn't negotiate with arsonists and murderers. This ranch belongs to my son's memory, and I'll die before I let it go." After the men rode away, Wade and Pete worked through the night to contain the fire and prevent it from spreading to the other buildings. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, but the house, the livestock, and the people were safe. Ruthie stood in the kitchen, mechanically preparing coffee while her hands shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. She'd killed a man last night, the first time she'd ever taken a life, and the reality of it was beginning to sink in. Wade found her there as the sun rose, staring out the window at the destruction Morton had wrought. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "You saved us," he said quietly. "If you hadn't been watching, if you hadn't been ready." "I couldn't let them hurt you," she whispered. "I couldn't let them take this away from us." Wade turned her in his arms, studying her face in the morning light. "Are you all right? What you had to do?" "I'm all right," she said, and meant it. "I did what I had to do to protect our home, our future." Through the window, they could see smoke still rising from the barn's remains. But they could also see old Pete leading the horses back to the corral, could hear the cattle lowing in the distance, could feel the solid foundation of the house beneath their feet. Morton had shown his true colors, had revealed himself as the kind of man who would burn and kill to get what he wanted. But he had also made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated the people he was trying to destroy. The war for Blackbriar Ranch was far from over, but the first major battle had been won, and as Wade held her close in the growing light of day, Ruthie knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The confrontation with Morton came 3 days later, not at the ranch, but in the heart of Cedar Falls itself. Wade had insisted they go to town together to file the trust documents with the county clerk and make their engagement public. If Morton wanted a fight, Wade was determined to have it in the light of day, with witnesses. They were walking out of the courthouse when Morton appeared, flanked by 2 well-dressed men who had the look of lawyers about them. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes burned with rage when he saw Wade's arm around Ruthie's waist. "Langston," Morton said, his voice carefully modulated, "I hear congratulations are in order." "Word travels fast," Wade replied evenly. "Indeed it does. I also hear you've been spreading some interesting stories about property ownership and legal technicalities." Morton's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Imagine my surprise when I learned about your father's little trust arrangement." "Not so little," Wade said. "Turns out it makes your offers somewhat irrelevant." Morton's composure cracked slightly. "You think a piece of paper is going to protect you? You think hiding behind a dead child's legal rights makes you untouchable?" The words were calculated to wound, and Ruthie felt Wade stiffen beside her. But his voice remained steady when he replied, "I think my son's memory is worth more than all your money and threats combined." "Your son?" Morton's laugh was ugly, bitter. "Tell me, Wade, do you ever wonder if he was really yours?" The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, the normal sounds of the town seemed to fade as people stopped to watch the confrontation unfolding on the courthouse steps. "What did you say?" Wade's voice was deadly quiet. Morton leaned forward, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by the gathering crowd. Elizabeth was a lonely woman, married to a man who was gone for months at a time on cattle drives. A beautiful woman with needs, with desires. Did you really think she spent all those long nights alone? Wade's hand moved to his gun, but Ruthie caught his wrist. She could feel the violence radiating from him, the barely controlled rage that Morton was deliberately provoking. "Don't," she whispered. "He wants you to draw on him. That's what this is about." Morton heard her and smiled. "Wise woman, your little housekeeper. She understands how these things work." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have here a sworn statement from Dr. Benjamin Hayes, who attended Elizabeth during her pregnancy with Tommy. Very interesting reading. Seems the boy was born a full month earlier than anyone expected, which raises questions about when he was conceived." Wade's face had gone white, but his voice was steady. "You're lying." "Am I?" Dr. Hayes was quite specific about the dates and about Elizabeth's emotional state during her final months. Guilt can be a terrible burden for a woman carrying another man's child. "That's enough." The voice belonged to Sarah Mitchell, who had pushed through the crowd to stand beside Wade and Ruthie. "I've heard quite enough of your poison, Mr. Morton." Behind her came Tom Harrison and Jake Miller, along with several other ranchers who had clearly come to town for this confrontation. The implicit threat was clear. Morton might have lawyers and hired guns, but Wade had something more valuable, neighbors who were willing to stand with him. Morton's eyes flicked over the assembled group, calculating odds and options. "This isn't over, Langston. Papers can be challenged, trusts can be broken, and reputations," his gaze slid to Ruthie, "can be destroyed with the right evidence." "You want to try?" Wade stepped forward, his hand now resting openly on his gun. "You want to drag my wife's name through the mud, spread lies about my family, burn my property? Go ahead. But understand this, I'm not the broken man you thought you were dealing with. I have something to fight for now, something worth protecting. And I'll be damned if I let a snake like you take it away." For a moment, the two men faced each other in the dusty street, and Ruthie could feel the weight of history between them, the war, the betrayals, the years of hatred that had brought them to this point. Then Wade reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made Morton's eyes widen in recognition. It was a faded photograph. Wade in his army uniform, standing beside a younger Morton, both of them smiling. "You want to know the real irony, Silas?" Wade said conversationally. "I saved your life during the war because I thought you were worth saving, because I believed there was something decent in you worth preserving." He tore the photograph in half, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "I was wrong then. I won't make that mistake again." Wade turned away, taking Ruthie's arm and walking toward their wagon. The crowd parted before them, and she could see respect in the faces of the townspeople, respect for a man who had faced down his demons and chosen love over revenge. But as they drove out of town, Ruthie looked back to see Morton still standing in the street, his face a mask of fury and something that might have been desperation. The battle was won, but she had a feeling the war was far from over. 6 months later, Ruthie stood in the doorway of the rebuilt barn, watching Wade put the finishing touches on a new sign. The wood was fresh-cut pine, the letters carefully carved and painted in neat black script. Blackbriar Ranch, Wade, Ruthie Langston. It was their wedding day. The barn had been transformed for the occasion, decorated with late spring wildflowers and ribbons that Sarah Mitchell had insisted were absolutely essential for a proper celebration. Half the county had turned out for the ceremony, filling the space with laughter and music and the kind of joy that had been absent from the ranch for far too long. Wade stepped back to admire his handiwork, then turned to smile at his bride. Ruthie wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, with Elizabeth's silver locket at her throat. It felt right, somehow honoring the past while embracing the future. "It's perfect," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "We're perfect," Wade corrected, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was no shadow of grief in his eyes, no burden of guilt weighing down his shoulders. He was simply a man in love, preparing to marry the woman who had given him back his life. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the circuit preacher with old Pete serving as best man and Sarah as matron of honor. When Wade slipped a simple gold band onto Ruthie's finger he'd made himself in his workshop, crafted with the same care he brought to all his carving, she felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was no longer Ruthie Bell Carter, the woman with a tarnished reputation and nowhere to belong. She was Ruthie Langston, partner in a ranch, wife to a good man, part of a community that had accepted her for who she was, rather than judging her for who she'd been. The reception lasted well into the evening, with Tom Harrison providing fiddle music and the local women contributing enough food to feed an army. Children ran between the tables, their laughter mixing with the adults' conversation and the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. As the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Wade found Ruthie sitting quietly on the porch steps, watching the celebration continue in the barn. "No regrets?" he asked, settling beside her. "About what? Marrying you, taking the job nobody wanted, fighting off arsonists and gunmen?" She smiled. "Not a single one." Wade was quiet for a moment, then said, "I went to see Tommy's grave this morning, before the ceremony." Ruthie turned to look at him, seeing the peace in his expression rather than the old pain. "How did that feel?" "Good, right. I told him about you, about the wedding, about how you've brought life back to this place." Wade's voice was soft, thoughtful. "I think he would have liked you, Elizabeth too." "I hope so. I've been taking care of their family after all." "Their family and mine." Wade took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Ruthie, there's something I want to tell you, something I should have said months ago." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. "When Morton said those things about Tommy, about whether he was really my sonnet, doesn't matter. Even if it were true, which I don't believe for a second, it wouldn't change anything. Tommy was my boy from the moment I held him, and Elizabeth was my wife, regardless of any gossip or lies people want to spread." "Wade, let me finish. What I'm trying to say is that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about showing up every day and choosing to love someone despite their flaws and because of their strengths." He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You chose this place, chose me, chose us. That makes you more family than any amount of shared blood ever could." Ruthie felt tears prick her eyes. "You're going to make me cry on my wedding day." "Happy tears, I hope." "The happiest." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. In the barn, someone was playing a slow waltz and couples were beginning to dance. "Mrs. Langston," Wade said formally, standing and offering her his hand. "Would you care to dance with your husband?" "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Langston." The barn floor had been cleared and polished for dancing, and the couples moved in gentle circles under the soft glow of lanterns. Wade was a surprisingly good dancer, leading Ruthie through the steps with easy confidence. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, impressed. "Elizabeth taught me, said a man should know how to properly escort his wife around a dance floor." His smile was warm, nostalgic, but not sad. She was very particular about proper behavior. "I like that she taught you," Ruthie said. "I like that she's still part of our life, part of who we are together. She always will be, her and Tommy both. They're part of this place, part of its history and its heart." As the music swirled around them, Ruthie thought about the journey that had brought her here, the scandal that had driven her from her old life, the desperate decision to take a job nobody wanted, the gradual transformation of two broken people into something whole and strong together. Morton had disappeared from the county shortly after their confrontation in town, his threats apparently empty once his hired guns found easier prey elsewhere. The other ranchers had banded together, forming a kind of mutual protection society that ensured no single property owner could be isolated and intimidated. But more than that, Blackbriar Ranch had become a symbol of something important, the idea that people could change, could heal, could build something beautiful out of the wreckage of their past mistakes and tragedies. As Wade spun her around the makeshift dance floor, Ruthie caught sight of the new sign through the open barn doors, the painted letters bold against the dark wood. Tomorrow, they would wake up as husband and wife, would begin the work of building a life together, of filling the old house with new memories. She had taken the job nobody wanted, and in doing so, had found everything she never knew she needed: a home, a purpose, a love that was strong enough to weather any storm. The music played on, and Ruthie Langston danced with her husband under the Texas stars, surrounded by friends and filled with the quiet contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong.